Somewhere along the front, a young soldier did something he had been trained his entire career to do. He saw an officer approach, straightened his back, and raised his hand in a crisp salute. Seconds later, that officer was dead. A single shot from a position no one had seen, and the soldier who saluted him would spend the rest of his life understanding that his gesture of respect had been the thing that marked the man for death. Across the armies of the 20th century, in the trenches, in the ruined cities, in the hedgerows of France and the frozen fields of the East, a strange order began to spread. Do not salute officers near the front. Do not call attention to the man with the bars on his collar. Treat him in the killing zone like any other filthy, exhausted soldier standing in the line. To a new recruit, it sounded like the collapse of everything he had been taught. The salute was sacred. It was the oldest gesture in soldiering. Why would any army forbid it? At first, the order sounded like disrespect. It was not. The truth was colder, and it had been written in the blood of thousands of young officers who never understood, until the moment it was too late that the small metal bars on their collars had turned them into the most hunted men on the battlefield. To understand how a salute could kill a man, you have to understand what the bars meant, and why a single piece of metal the size of a coin could decide who lived and who died. In most Western armies, rank was written on the body. A soldier could read another man's entire authority in a single glance, from the markings on his shoulders, his sleeves, or his collar. In the American system, a thin bar meant an officer, a gold bar for a second lieutenant, the most junior officer of all, a silver bar for a first lieutenant. 2 silver bars worn side by side like tiny railroad tracks marked a captain. These were the men who gave the orders, the men who decided when a unit advanced, when it dug in, when it fell back, and, too often, when it died. And that is exactly what made them valuable, not only to their own side, but to the enemy watching through a telescopic sight from 400 meters away. Kill an ordinary soldier, and you remove 1 rifle from the line. Kill the man with the bars, and you remove the mind that controls a dozen, or 50, or 100 rifles. You take away the plan. You take away the decisions. You leave a group of frightened men with no one to tell them what to do next. In the brutal language of war, an officer was not one target. He was the switch that turned an entire unit on or off. The problem was finding him. On a battlefield, from a distance, through smoke and mud and identical uniforms, one man looks very much like another. A marksman could lie in wait for hours and never be certain which of the moving shapes below was worth the single shot that would give away his position. He needed a tell. He needed the men down there to point out their leader for him, and nothing pointed quite as clearly as a salute. This lesson was not learned in a classroom. It was learned in the mud of the Western Front, in the years after 1914, when the armies of Europe marched into a kind of war that no one had prepared for. In those first years, an officer was easy to find. He was supposed to be. The entire culture of command was built on being seen. A British officer went into battle dressed differently from his men, and he was proud of it. He wore a finer cut of tunic. He carried a pistol on his hip instead of a rifle. Across his chest ran the Sam Brown belt, a broad leather strap that marked him instantly as a gentleman and a leader. Many wore riding breeches and tall polished boots. In the trenches of France and Flanders, he stood out from the ranks of ordinary soldiers like a target painted in a different color. And he led from the front. When the whistle blew and the men climbed the ladders into no man's land, the officer went first. He was the one standing upright in the open, turning back to wave his men forward, shouting over the roar of the guns. He was visible, deliberately visible, at the exact moment the enemy's rifles and machine guns and snipers were searching for something worth shooting. The German army had trained marksmen watching those trenches. Patient men with good optics who understood the value of a leader. They studied the signs, the pistol instead of the rifle, the different silhouette, the man the others turned toward, the man the others saluted, and one by one, along miles of front, they picked the young officers off. The cost was staggering, and it fell hardest on the youngest and most junior. The second lieutenants, the subalterns barely out of school, who led the first wave and were often the first to fall. Accounts from the period spoke of officer casualty rates far above those of the men they led. One figure, repeated so often that it hardened into legend, claimed that the life expectancy of a junior officer on the Western Front could be measured in weeks. The exact number is disputed by historians to this day, and the reality varied wildly from one battle to the next. But the pattern behind the legend was real. To wear the markings of an officer in that war was to carry a shorter life in your collar. At first, the armies did not change. The old traditions were strong, and there was something almost sacred about the officer who led visibly from the front. But the reports kept coming back, units losing their leaders in the first minutes of an attack. Companies going into battle and coming out, commanded by whoever happened to still be breathing. Slowly, painfully, the lesson forced its way up the chain of command. The very things that made an officer look like an officer were killing him. So the armies began to adapt. Officers were told to lose the Sam Brown belt near the line, to carry a rifle like everyone else, to dull their bright buttons and hide their rank. They were told to blend in. It helped. But the deeper habit, the instinct that had been drilled into every soldier from his first day in uniform, would prove far harder to kill. Because the salute did not disappear when the belt did. And a generation later, in a new war, that same gesture would once again start getting men killed. When the world went to war again after 1939, the lesson of the trenches had to be learned all over by a new generation of soldiers who had never seen the Western Front. The technology had improved. The optics were sharper, the rifles were more accurate, and the sniper as a specialist had become a fixture of every serious army. In the German forces, in the Soviet Red Army, in the armies of Britain and the United States, trained marksmen were sent forward with one clear job: find the men who mattered and remove them. Nowhere was this clearer than in the fields of Normandy in the summer of 1944. After the landings, American and British troops pushed inland into a landscape of ancient farm fields, divided by thick earthen banks and dense hedges. This was the bocage, the hedgerow country, and it was perfect ground for an ambush. A German sniper could bury himself in the tangled green, invisible from a few feet away, and watch an American unit move through the gaps. He had time, he had cover, all he needed was to know who to shoot. And the Americans, fresh to combat, kept telling him. Out of pure habit, men still deferred to their officers in the open. They still gestured toward them, still stepped aside for them, still, in some cases, saluted them. A soldier would snap to attention out of reflex, and somewhere in the hedges, a marksman would quietly note exactly which man had just been marked as important. This is where the story turned in a way few of those young soldiers expected. The German marksmen were not only hunting officers, they had learned to hunt the signs of officers, and one sign in particular became infamous: the radio. A commander needed to communicate, and communication meant a radio operator, and the radio meant an antenna. That thin metal rod rose above the grass and the hedgerows wherever a command element moved. To a sniper, the antenna was a flag. Find the antenna, and nearby you would find the radio operator. And standing close to the radio operator, more often than not, you would find the officer giving the orders. Kill the man with the radio, and you cut the unit off from the world. Kill the officer beside him, and you cut off its head. Soldiers learned, quickly and grimly, not to walk too close to the radio man. The space around the antenna became a place where people died. Men had believed the danger lived only in the obvious things, the bars and the belts. They were wrong. The enemy had learned to read the whole grammar of command: who pointed, who directed, who carried binoculars and a map case instead of a rifle, who stood a little back from the others, watching, deciding, who the men looked at when something went wrong. Every one of those small signals was a line pointing straight at the leader. And the salute was the loudest signal of them all. The Eastern Front told the same story in an even harsher key. In the ruins of cities like Stalingrad, where the fighting collapsed into a nightmare of rubble and close range, snipers on both sides turned officer hunting into an art form. A German officer moving through the shattered streets, giving orders, glancing at a map, was exactly the kind of target Soviet marksmen were trained to wait for. Command elements learned to move low, move fast, and never linger in the open. The same grim education that had begun in the trenches of the First War was now being repeated, block by ruined block, in the Second. So now we can answer the question the title asks: Why were soldiers told never to salute the man with the bars? Why would any army suspend its most fundamental gesture of respect? The answer is that the salute had been turned inside out. For centuries, it had been a mark of honor. In the killing zone, it had become a death sentence. Not for the man giving it, but for the man receiving it. Consider what a salute actually does. It is a public declaration. It announces to anyone watching, "This man is my superior. This man is worth respect. This man gives the orders." On a parade ground, that message is exactly what it should be. In a forward area, within reach of a hidden marksman, that same message becomes a targeting instruction. The soldier lifting his hand might as well be pointing at his officer and calling out, "Here, this one, the important one, shoot him." And the consequences of that single shot reached far beyond one man. This is the part that made commanders truly afraid. A unit that lost its officer did not simply lose a person. It lost its coordination in the most dangerous seconds of its existence. The men might be pinned under fire, needing someone to decide whether to push forward or fall back, and the one person trained to make that call would be lying dead in the dirt. Panic could spread, movement could stall. An entire attack could collapse. In the cold arithmetic of the battlefield, removing one officer at the right moment could be worth removing 20 ordinary soldiers. The enemy understood this perfectly. That is why snipers were trained to prioritize leaders above every other target. Not out of cruelty, though it was cruel, out of pure efficiency. A dead officer was the most valuable thing a single bullet could buy. Which left the armies with a brutal choice. They could hold on to their traditions, their crisp salutes, and their visible ranks, and their proud, conspicuous leaders. Or they could keep those leaders alive. They could not do both. And so, in the places where it mattered most, they chose survival over ceremony. They told their soldiers to stop saluting. They told their officers to hide the very bars that marked their achievement and their authority. They inverted their own rituals, quietly and deliberately, because the alternative was watching their best men die for a gesture. If you are finding this piece of history as unsettling as I do, take a moment to subscribe. This channel digs into the forgotten rules and the dark decisions of the wars that shaped our world, and there is far more of it still to come. Now let us look at what this order actually did to the men who had to live under it. Step back for a moment from the snipers and the battlefields, and look at what this did to the culture of the armies themselves. Because an order like this does not only change tactics, it changes the relationship between men. For officers, the effect was strange and often bitter. A young lieutenant had spent months, sometimes years, earning the right to wear those bars. They represented everything he had worked for. And now, at the front, he was being told to hide them, to smear mud across them, to pin them beneath his collar where no one could see. Some carried rifles they had never learned to love, precisely so they would not stand out. Some ordered their own men, on pain of punishment, never to salute them within sight of the enemy. Others went further and told their men not to call them sir in the open, not to defer, not to do anything that would single them out. The markings of leadership had become something to conceal in the one place leadership mattered most. For the ordinary soldier, it created its own quiet horror. A man might salute out of reflex, the way he had been trained 1,000 times, and then watch in frozen disbelief as his officer dropped. He would carry the knowledge that his own hand had helped aim the shot. There are grim accounts, passed down through the memory of these wars, of soldiers who trained themselves to suppress the instinct entirely, who learned never to look directly at their officer in the open, never to turn toward him, never to hand the watching enemy a single clue. The most natural gestures of respect and obedience had to be unlearned, because respect could get a good man killed. And the officers still had to lead. That was the cruelest part of all. Hiding the bars did not remove the danger. An officer still had to stand up when others stayed down. He still had to move between positions under fire, still had to be the one making decisions where everyone could see. He could dull his insignia and drop the belt and carry a rifle, but the moment he began to command, to point, to direct, to do the very job he was there to do, he made himself visible again. The signs of leadership were never really in the metal. They were in the behavior, and you cannot hide the behavior of a man leading other men through the worst hours of their lives. The disputes over exactly how many officers died this way continue among historians, and the records are uneven from one war to the next. But the response of the armies tells you everything you need to know. You do not suspend a sacred tradition, one drilled into every soldier from his first day in uniform, unless the cost of keeping it has become unbearable. The order to stop saluting was not a small administrative note buried in a manual. It was an admission, written into doctrine, that leadership had become the most dangerous job on the field. But this was never only about one war or one salute. The logic that emptied the space around the radio antenna and stripped the bars from officers' collars did not end in 1945. It hardened into permanent practice. Look closely at a modern soldier, and you can still see the shape of this old fear. In today's armies, rank in the field is deliberately made hard to read. Gone are the bright, flashing metal bars catching the sun. In their place you find subdued insignia, dulled and darkened, chosen in colors meant to disappear against the uniform rather than stand out from it. On many combat uniforms, rank is stitched in muted thread, low on the chest, almost invisible from a distance. The entire design philosophy is the reverse of the parade ground. On parade, an officer's rank should be seen from across the field. In combat, it should be seen by no one but the men standing right beside him. And the rule about saluting never truly went away. In garrison, in peacetime, on the clean grounds of a base far from any enemy, the salute lives on, sharp and proud, and exactly as tradition demands. But in a combat zone, soldiers are still taught to let it go. Do not salute in the field. Do not mark your officers for a watching enemy. The gesture that means honor in one place means danger in another, and every soldier learns where the line between them falls. There is something haunting in that. The salute is one of the oldest rituals human beings have. It is meant to say, I recognize you, I respect you, I will follow you. And war took that gesture, the purest expression of loyalty a soldier has, and turned it into a weapon that could be used against the very person it was meant to honor. The order to never salute the man with the bars is remembered not because it was strange, but because of what it revealed. It showed that in the extremes of war, even respect becomes tactical. Even the way one man looks at another can become a matter of life and death. The bars on a collar were supposed to be a symbol of everything a soldier could aspire to. For a long and bloody stretch of the 20th century, they were also a mark that had to be hidden, because to be seen leading was to be seen dying. And the armies that endured were the ones willing to abandon their oldest ceremonies for the sake of the men who wore them.